Hello, everybody. My name is Rush Lilavivat. I am the director of tabletop panels at DragonCon. I've been doing it for 13 years. I'm a professional game master. I've worked in the industry as well, in publishing, and I was nominated for an Emmy, and I have received the Top Game Master Award at DragonCon 2 times. That is why I'm here to talk to you guys today. And I'm going to introduce the other hosts on this very special DragonCon episode, I suppose. Abby, why don't you introduce yourself, please?
I'm Abby. I have been with DragonCon since 2017, so however many years that makes that. I moderate panels, volunteer, line management, all that good stuff, and I GM on streams with the Worlds Guild, and you can find me doing cosplay on Witty X Witch and running the DragonCon socials. So,
Jared?
I'm Jared Shoemaker. I am much less impressive, but I've been running games for, I don't know, 20 years or so for friends. Friend of Rush's, live here locally, and enjoy hanging out and chatting about gaming stuff.
Very awesome. So one of the things that Jared and I have done before is we put together a podcast asking the most common, or I'm sorry, answering the most common questions that we would get at the DragonCon tabletop panels. And there's a whole series of podcasts that you can still look up. Jared, where can people find that?
That's at thetabledragon.com. I believe there's a handful of episodes that we did. One special interview thing we did with the creators of the Illimat board game that had just come out at the time. But yeah, some questions, like you said, some questions that we were commonly asked by people just getting into GMing.
Right. And so for a while that was sort of, we were kind of done with those common questions, but as D&D has exploded in popularity, totally exploded, what I have found in my circles is there are a lot of new GMs out there. And what I find is they are lacking many of the skills that veteran GMs might have. And I began to notice this disconnect. So it's my hope that through a series of these videos that we let people know what kind of skills or things they can hone from veteran GMs or as a veteran GM themselves. Like, so if you're a veteran GM, you might already have many of these skills that we're going to be talking about, but it's going to be aware of them and to kind of hone your knife, that sort of thing. So just let's talk generally speaking about what's the difference between, say, a rookie GM who's kind of wet behind the ears but very excited, and a veteran GM who might be very excited as well but has a little bit more experience under their belt. What's something that would tell you, okay, this person is a veteran GM versus a rookie GM? Either of you.
well, I mean, the obvious one is how much time they've been doing it.
Okay,
but
right.
when I'm playing with a new GM and I don't know if they've been doing it a long time, one of the kickers for me is knowing or watching them like make sure every player has an opportunity to do something cool. So if one player is, spending 20 minutes describing what they're doing, a veteran GM might say, cool, what are you, the other person, doing too? And making sure they get a chance to describe something as opposed to just sitting there and letting someone hog all the time.
Okay, so definitely being more balanced about who gets how much spotlight time and that sort of thing. Okay, Jared, how about you? What's something that a veteran?
If we're talking about how to spot someone who maybe hasn't been doing this real long, and maybe this is speaking just from personal experience from myself as well, but how well a GM can roll with something they weren't expecting. If they had a lot of I mean, the first time you run a game, right? This is probably universal, but you kind of have this idea of, oh, it'll go this way and they'll start here and then they'll go to this area, and maybe you even have a flow chart with like choices they can make. But you kind of expect them to stay on that roadmap. And if they meet in the tavern and then you expect them to go talk to the king, and then one of the players at the table says, I'm going to go shopping, how well they roll with that and can come up with an interesting scene or engaging interactions from that point of deviance, we'll say. That's a pretty strong tell in my experience.
I think there's a very funny distinction in the way a GM goes, okay, whenever whenever that sort of curveball is thrown, that you can tell which is the rookie and which is the vet by the way they say, haha, okay.
Not whether they say it, but the way they say
The
it.
way
I like
they say it. Yes, exactly.
I agree very much. I definitely agree very much. So one of the things we're going to be going over today, to just get us kicked off, I would agree with both of those things, and those are things that we should probably cover in further episodes. Dealing with unexpected things, and then also making sure everybody gets the right amount of spotlight time. But one thing I wanted to go over today was reading the room. I noticed there's a big difference between a veteran GM and a rookie GM when it comes to reading the room. Now, I also want to make a distinction that we talked about right before recording this, which was some people have that talent innately. So you could have someone who is pretty new to GMing, but already good at reading the room. And we'll talk about what that is here in a minute. And so they just have that instinct. And so because of that, they might start off the bat as a very strong game master. Game mastering is a skill, and like other skills, you can just come to the table with a lot of it already, or for some people, it takes some time to hone it. So what do I mean by reading the room? A veteran game master can usually look at people, look at everyone at the table, and tell if they're getting bored or if they're really excited. And then another part of that is that then they can capitalize on those things. So, for example, you might be, let's say, if you were a beginning game master, like for me, here's an example from when I was a beginning game master back in the Stone Age. I would see people getting bored and I wouldn't know what to do. I'd be like, gosh. And then I would start to scramble and try to make things up and try to engage them. And because I'm acting out of a place of anxiety, it would not go over that well. And sometimes they would pick it up and sometimes they wouldn't. So I had to kind of learn by trial and error.
Right.
So we're trying to help people here. So instead of learning by trial and error, by just giving you some tips and hints that might help you. So one obviously is telling if people are getting bored or they're not engaged, but also how do you know, for example, if a particular person is checked out or if they're just being quiet? And then if everyone is kind of like not feeling the story, when is it time to blow something up? When is it time to take a break? When is it time to stop everything, reassess, and then see what's going on? So there's a lot to reading the room. It's not just about taking the mood of the table. There are many, many, many levels to this. So generally speaking, do you guys have anything you want to say about giving advice on how to read the room, that sort of thing? Anything you want to say on that one?
About how to do it?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that's kind of what we're talking about here. This is really a social skill. Right?
Yes.
I mean, it's not that it doesn't at its base doesn't really pertain. I mean, in my opinion, anyway, to gaming specifically. It's just being aware of the people around you and like what their mental state is, and you know, it's the same as if you know you're hanging out at a friend's house with a group of people, and it's like, oh, is somebody getting bored by this anecdote that I'm telling that I think is hilarious, but you know, and knowing when to shut, you know, that I'll like wrap that up and let's move on to something else. This isn't really working. So it's a social. I don't know how to advise people on how to do. I mean, listen, right, or pay attention. Try to get outside. I know when you're running a game, especially new GMs, and maybe this is something to bring up. you're probably a little bit nervous, especially if this is like the first game that you've run or the first campaign you're doing. I mean, hopefully you're playing with people you like playing with. But you might be, oh, I really want this to go well and stuff like that, and you might be a little too stuck in your own head and worried about, oh, how am I gonna present these scenes and keep be entertaining and stuff like that. And you can concentrate on that to the exclusion of everything else and not be as aware of the people around you and what their state is. So I guess if there is advice in that, it's to make sure you're paying attention and not completely focused on what you're going to do.
Yeah. And like listening itself is its own skill too, that you can practice just being out in the world and talking to friends. Making sure you're doing active listening and not just like, okay, yeah, cool. And if it helps you to like leave a conversation and make notes about it, do that. I think there are definitely a few things you can do that are pretty good clues as to how your party is feeling. And I think they are easier to do in an actual physical room with around the table as opposed to virtually.
Yes.
And I know people talk about like, oh, I don't allow phones at my table. And some people do because some people are fidgety. Or I know for me, I have a to-do list running on my phone. And if I think of something mid-game, I'm like, oh, I need to do that tomorrow. I need to write it down right then, or I'm going to lose it. And so I think at the point where if someone is like, okay, let me just do this on my phone real fast. Okay, done. You're probably fine. But if they've been on their phone doom scrolling on Twitter for 20 minutes, at that point, you might want to check in. And I think too,
I like how you said that. No, I really like how you said that.
Yeah, and I really think that it's no big deal just to check in with your players, like every chunk of game, every story, a major story beat of that session, just sort of be like, all right, guys, how we feeling?
And then when what I want to add to that is I love how you said that, because a lot of times when you say how you feeling, people, they don't want conflict. So they say, oh, we're doing great. This is fun. But there is a skill involved where somebody says something and and then you listen carefully and you're like, they say they're having fun, but not really.
Yeah.
Or they say they're having fun and they're being genuine. And that is, like you said, Jared, that's a esoteric skill that's difficult to pin down, but that's something to be aware of, right? That people may say one thing, but mean another. And that's unfortunately human beings. And you just have to be aware of that and kind of hone that as you grow. One thing I have found, two things that I've found very helpful. And even though the first one seems obvious, it needs to be pointed out, is to pay attention to players' body language, right? If you're at a table and people are leaned forward, they're interested. If they're leaned back, they might be a little bit bored or a little bit disengaged. Are they turned towards you or are they turned to somebody else? And then part of that reading body language is what Abby said, scrolling through your phone briefly, probably not a problem. But if they're staring at their phone, that's good body language that they may be disengaged or simply just addicted to the phone.
Right.
Another thing that is useful when it comes to reading the room is to do, I'm getting ready to actually run a game for some teenagers. And something I found very useful last time I ran that game for them was a sort of A and B approach. I did something A and I kind of gauged their interest. And then I did something B and I saw how that engaged their interest. And I found that really worked, because I was like, oh, they're really not as interested in A. They're more interested in B. So let's do B. And I found they were more and more engaged. Now you can keep doing that. Like, okay, well, now that you like B, do you like C or D? Because C is really similar to B. No, you'd rather move on to D. Okay, so
I'd rather maybe throw A back in there at a later date as well. Be like, okay, what do you guys think of this now? But no, I like that a lot. And I think that can be really useful for when you're just starting out, with a new group or a new game. That's
It's sort of the party favorite in PC. you meet so many NPCs that the party are like, okay, it's an NPC. Quest got, see you later. And then you have those occasional NPCs where they're like, I love them. We're going to adopt them and take care of them. And you're like, okay, that NPC needs to come back.
No, I think that is a great point. That's a whole nother level to reading the room. Exactly as you said, like, oh, okay, these people like this NPC. We need that person needs to come back. Yeah, go ahead, Jared.
Maybe I'm gonna falsely apologize in advance for tangents that I'm absolutely going to bring up, but there's also a difference between being a new GM for new players and a new GM for veteran players, because you mentioned that NPC thing, and how, that we love this NPC, so that means, yes, definitely bring them back. That's going to engage them. That plays right into what Rush was saying. I'm running a Deadlands game for some friends of mine right now, and they've been playing for a long time, and they have taken the bull by the horns because I have introduced an NPC they have decided needs to be a major part of the story and have literally dragged this character with them. Yeah, what do you do about that? But yes, it's engaging, right? I mean, in terms of reading the room, they were all in agreement. No, she needs to come with us. And I was like, okay, didn't plan on that, but we'll go with it.
Add that to the episode Excel sheet.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, Jared, that is you reading the room, right? Like,
well,
I have
for sure.
seen GMs go, well, they can't come with you.
Yeah.
They're kind of stuck in that mode, or they come because the GM has really no choice. The person's coming, but now that NPC doesn't really do anything.
Right. And that's, to be honest, what I'm a little worried about, because you can go the other way as well. And now I can make the NPC that's embedded in the party to a certain extent become too much of a focus. And that takes spotlight. So there's a balance there for sure.
Yep. Okay. So generally speaking, this is sort of like the very broad idea of reading the room. And we're touched on a lot of different tangents when it comes to reading the room. I want to touch on a couple different tangents as well, just so people can get the idea of how deep this topic goes. But I don't want to get too far into it. I want to give it its own episode. But one thing we talked about right before we recorded was reading the room goes all the way to consent.
Right.
So the example I gave these guys was we were running a Night's Black Agents game, which is a game about vampire hunters. And someone wrote in their backstory that essentially they were a vampire. They encountered someone, they met them, they spent the night with them, and then they woke up really weird and with weird marks on their neck. So I'm like, okay, well, you're a vampire then. And as the character was slowly turning into a vampire, it became very apparent to me that the player was actually not interested in that sort of thing. And what probably happened is that player thought it would be cool, but as they were going through it, oh, actually, this is not that cool. So as a game master, you have to be able to pick up on those things. See, and I did it basically by that A-B sort of thing. Like, okay, this vampire thing is happening. I'm not really interested in that. Okay, this other thing is happening. Oh, I'm much more interested in that. And as we kept going A-B, I'm like, all right, obviously they are not into being a vampire. And I gave them an out, which I thought was totally fine. Because again, I know some game masters might have been like, well, this is what you signed up for. This is what you said you wanted. Well, yeah, until they did it. And then they're like, oh, I've changed my mind. And it's okay to change your mind, So it goes that goes all the way into consent, because had I pushed it, I would have been breaching the role play type thing. And
there are a lot of different ways you can approach that too.
Right.
But I like your approach. I mean, the first thing that came to my mind though, and this factors into maybe some things to talk about later, was, oh, but if they're suddenly not a vampire, have I now violated the internal consistency of the setting and the story and that sort of thing? And then you go, well, this setting and the consistency is not as important as somebody having fun.
Agreed.
But where, how do you address that line? Like, where do you go with that and that sort of thing? But that's really case specific. And I don't know how you talk too much about that without really getting into the details.
Yeah,
right. I think that we should talk about that at length
Mhm.
a little bit later.
Yeah. No,
So
I had a similar situation with a werewolf character in one of my Dragon Age games.
vampires and werewolves. So very quickly, what's your werewolf story?
I had a player whose backstory was that they had been cursed to be a werewolf. We were, talking about playing D&D, and then I discovered the Dragon Age TTRPG and was like, actually, I really want to do this. And there are werewolves, so we can make that work. And we had kind of made this whole situation where if they were near Red Lyrium, they would have to make a willpower save to not turn into a werewolf. And they kept making their save. So I was like, okay, well, you didn't turn into a werewolf and you haven't ever because you keep making your save. And so we got to the planned session where it was like, this is the guy that cursed you. What do you do about that? And so the guy ended up dying, which the original plan had been, okay, you'll have these werewolf moments, and then if you do kill him, then you will be free of your curse. The spellcaster that cast it is dead, can't do it anymore. So you're free. But since they had never gotten to transform, I was like, do you want to keep that? Or do you want it to go away? Even though it's never happened. And they decided they wanted to keep it just to play with it mechanically. And I was like, yeah, makes total sense. We'll let you keep that. We'll build you a stat block. No problem.
That is something that I think I can't emphasize enough for beginning game masters, is that it is okay to occasionally stop the game and talk about the game itself in the meta.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
It is okay. Well, it's going to break immersion. No, it's okay. It's okay. You're there to have fun. It is totally okay to be like, hey, this is what's going on in the story. Would you like to do this or that? And, so that I think that was definitely a good choice on your part.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, you have to. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, and to the point of, earlier of like the, okay, when you get thrown a curveball, is I do actually find a lot of new GMs don't feel like they can stop and figure it out. And they're like, got to come up with something fast. But veteran GMs tend to be a little more comfortable and have that moment of like, let me think about that real quick.
Right. I agree. So one thing we talked about, so we talked about giant big group dynamics, how to read the room, generally speaking. And we went off on a few tangents. Just a few. How do you tell if someone is genuinely disengaged versus just a quiet person? Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
I think that comes with knowing the person. And especially early on, if you are the GM that's checking in with every player, like, cool, you do that. What do you do? Okay, cool. What do you do? And they're the type of person that's like, I help out. I lean against the wall because I'm cool, or, something like that. It's like, okay, you're a quiet person. You're not the person who enters into the room and says, I'd like to do this thing. I think knowing that characteristic is really important to tell the difference. I do think that with quiet players, it is trickier to tell, but I think there's still that very clear delineation when they are obviously checked out.
Yeah, if they don't know what to do, when you get around to them and they don't know what to do, that can be indicative of a few different things, really. But it is worth saying, okay, do they not know what to do because they're not invested in what's going on, or they don't feel like they can contribute, their character doesn't fit? Does this actually indicate a problem, like with the dynamics of the game? Or is it just, oh, I'm unfamiliar with this situation and I'm still trying to get my bearings? Ideally, you don't want the players to hit that sort of stalemate where there's like, well, I just don't know what to do, because that's just not fun for them, right? Mm-hmm. But that may or may not indicate disengagement, but I think it certainly can. If they're just like, well, I don't know the subtext can definitely be, this doesn't interest me. Carry on. I'll catch up when it matters. You mentioned the phone thing earlier, Abby, and So, and I guess, I don't know if this is a question for you guys or what, but so I've had players in my group that are on their phones frequently, for long stretches of time. And I find that very draining for me, because it feels like, oh, you're just not interested in what I'm doing. The thing is, and this is almost more irritating, is that especially one of these players would always know exactly what was going on, would always know, like I never had to repeat things for this person. Never seemed like they weren't, they always seemed like they weren't listening. But then when, you ask them to do something in context, they knew exactly what was going on and would pick it up and go with it, no problem. I'm like, you're giving me no energy whatsoever, but I can't honestly say you're not in the game, I guess. And then, is that a problem? Is that, I don't know anymore. It's kind of like, well, if you're obviously not paying attention, maybe that's a problem, but you are paying attention, just not obviously. The thing is, yeah, I just found that.
I just want to interject. No, I think you are well within your rights to be like, look,
Yeah.
because it's a two-way street, right?
Yeah.
Maybe they are absorbing everything. Maybe they are engaged in their own way, but you as a game master, it's hard for you to engage.
Right. Here is the thing, though, and this does play into what we've been talking about. And this might be something for new GMs to kind of consider too, because you're going to encounter this. In fact, I would say most people are like this to a greater or lesser extent. This person is just like this to a greater extent. They were very into the action combat scenes. But anything that had anything to do with interpersonal RP, looking around a new city, trying to gather clues, investigation, almost completely checked out. Listening to what was going on, but would contribute almost nothing. Unless I called for a die roll, or unless, there was something like, they were just very mechanically minded into the game in those aspects. When we were in combat, they typically play fighter characters right there, knew what they were going to do, interested in that a lot. But during the rest of the game, you couldn't tell.
Right.
I mean, I think for that, it sort of comes into setting expectations on the front end. Do you want a more crunchy combat type game? Do you want a more RP shopping type game?
Right. But what do you do when 4/5 of your group wants A and they are the clear B, and they're happy to hang out through all the A just to get to the B, right? Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I mean, for me, with like people being on phones, one of my pet peeve there is when they're on their phone and it comes to like their turn in combat, and I'm like, hey,
yeah,
like, Jared, it's your turn. And you're like, Jared,
what?
Pay attention. And then they spend 10 minutes.
I haven't had that problem, thankfully.
So that definitely drives me crazy, because like, you're not, you're coming around.
Yeah.
And you're still not with that program. So that's very frustrating to me. One thing too with like RP is, a lot of GMs give each character kind of their own arc. And so I don't feel like it's super vital that another character is invested in the character whose arc it is.
Right. And I'm speaking to more like group dynamics. No, I get that. The thing is too, because like I try to do stuff like that, right? But we can talk about how the best way to approach this is. I tend not to bludgeon character arcs over the party's head, right? I'll sprinkle something in. I'll drop some clues. I'll be like, oh, hey, I'm going to bring up this thing from your background that you would obviously be interested in. Do you pick it up and run with it? If not, we'll carry on with the kind of the main what's going on that has to do with everybody, right? Mm-hmm. So I kind of give them opportunities. Basically it's like, oh, well, then later that night after we've done all the group stuff, I'm going to go talk to so-and-so because you dropped this little thing. I would drop things in front of this player that had to do with their background, minimal nibbles, right? Mm-hmm. Like it just wasn't their thing. And that's fine, right? I mean, I can't say you're having fun wrong. Yeah, it does make you wonder. And I think that if you're a new GM, to bring this back around, because I think it does relate, as much as I do love my tangents. If you're not expecting that, if you're new to GMing and you're like, oh well, everybody. I mean, you gotta understand there's going to be different levels of engagement for different aspects of the game from different people at different times, and maybe you already know that. Maybe you already know the people you're playing with well, but maybe you don't. And I think it's good to know that. And what you were saying, Rush, about the AB thing, be ready to be like, oh, well, okay, is less than half of the table engaged here. Maybe I need to drop this, move over to B, see if that gets a higher percentage. But honestly, I mean, what do you guys think? I'm not sure that trying to cater to it, like, if I tried to make sure that every single scene had 100% engagement, I don't think there'd be much variety in the game, right? There's just not enough that everybody will bite on.
And that's one of those nuances that
you got to be okay with, okay, well, I'm going to do this scene because players 1 and 2 are going to love it. And player 5 is going to be like, whatever. But that's cool because I'm going to do this for these players here. And then later on, I'll do something for player 5 that I know they're super into. And it's okay if not everybody is really, 100% there all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the answer.
It's a nuanced call. You have to. It's very individual. It varies from night to night.
Yes,
it's a very nuanced call. And
that's a thing too that you haven't brought up yet is, or maybe this was implied, but just when you're talking about temperature taking, just seeing where people are at today. Like, I mean, you can know your friends, but if they come in and like half of them are just really exhausted, like if you play on a weeknight, like after work or something, if it's been a long day, you look at that and you go, oh, wow, okay, so the energy level in the room is now at 20%. You can make a judgment call and you can go, do we do something else tonight? Is it, is this, time to play cards or board games or something? Or do you go, okay, I'm going to have to bring 130% of my game, or this is going to, not really get there. Or
I want to jump in real quick.
Sure.
I like what you said there about looking at the energy level of the room. So the other night, for example, everybody was in a giggly, laughy mood with this one group I have. And I was like, that's okay. We're just going to be giggly and laughy. And they still had, now, it wasn't so bad that the adventure got totally derailed.
Yeah.
We still went through the adventure. We still had a good time. They still participated, but it was more laughy and giggly than it was normally.
Were you trying to run horror?
Well, no, and in fact, it was a horror game.
Knowing Rush, it probably was.
No. But it was actually a horror game, but I was like, I'm going to let it go because I could tell that was the energy of the room. Right? So even though that's a difficult skill to hone, it's important to be aware that that is a skill. Mm-hmm. That you can look and see, like, are people low energy, high energy? What kind of energy? Are they kind of laughy and jokey today? Are they more serious? Are they ready for it? So, and the reason that will really help you as a game master is that sometimes I'm like, okay, they're too laughy and giggly. I had this really cool scene in mind. I'm not going to do it right now.
Yeah.
They're just not
for sure.
Yeah.
And so I save it.
It's sort of the opposite of putting stuff in your player's way. In this situation, you take it out of their way to save for later.
I never thought about that, but yeah, I really like.
Yeah. I mean, you got to just look at it and say, this isn't going to play right tonight. We're just not in the right headspace. And that can mean a lot of different things. What do you do? You two, when it's you that has that is at 20% energy, or is just in a strange mood or something? Because I will tell you that on many occasions, it's come time to start the game that I'm running, and I'm like, man, I am just exhausted. And there's I think there'd be a certain point where I say, I just can't do this tonight, guys. But most of the time, I have found that if I'm up front and I say, hey, guys, I'm really tired, we're going to try to do this, a lot of times they'll pick up the slack and they'll bring energy back into the game. And you know, it's good to have players that can do that. And by halfway through, I'm back in it, right? I'm doing stuff.
I also do, like, sort of saying, hey, y'all, I'm just really tired, and they help pick up that slack. I also do a lot of peeks behind the curtain. And so there's been many a combat where I am like, okay, I could do a full roll for this person, but I don't really feel like doing it that particular way because I don't want to do the math right now. So here's how many die. I'm going to roll one, and that's how many of the minions are dead. Like, something along those lines.
I really like the way you put that, like the peeks behind the curtain.
Yeah.
Because I do the same thing. I never had articulated that way, and I love the way you really put that.
You talking about trying to shorthand certain mechanical aspects in the interest of not belaboring something that's clearly not getting the traction that would justify that. Is that kind of where you're?
Yeah, and
constantly doing that.
In RP situations, it's they tell you that blank. As opposed to doing the voice, doing the character. It's like, yeah, this character tells you this thing.
I default to that almost, but yes, there have been times in the Deadlands game I mentioned earlier. They had a long conversation with this NPC, and there was a lot of back and forth, and it was kind of like tense, and like there's this kind of social tug of war going on. And then later they were like, well, we're gonna have another conversation with this NPC. I'm like, we're not going to dive in. Not enough has happened. We need to get to some action. We are not going to dive into another 20 minutes of RP. We need to get to some dice rolling and bring the energy up and that sort of stuff. So yes.
No, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Yes.
That actually is something I do with every game I ever run, is to help keep engagement up, is I'm constantly asking for dice rolls. Because like as a player, I cannot stand a game that goes 4 hours rolling maybe twice. It's like, I bought all the clickety-clack math rocks. Let me roll them. Why did I buy them? So,
and I know a lot of players with that opinion.
Yeah. And so
it's good to keep in mind.
Any level of persuasion, like constant, like, okay, cool, roll it for me. Even if it's a guaranteed success, it's like, all right, I want to know how well you succeed. Though.
Exactly. That's a big thing too, is that there's a lot of times I'll call for rolls, and it's not whether you do this, it's how well you do this, how quickly you do this, you know, do you get the great outcome or the mediocre outcome, you know, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I think you're absolutely right. The players want to roll dice, and the more, I mean, it's fun, right?
Yeah. And I think having that, like, cool, roll for it, will keep people be like, oh, there's a roll now. Are they gonna make it? And so that kind of gets other people invested in whether or not their friend succeeds.
And it also makes them do something physically rather than just sitting there. Like they have to pick up a thing, roll it on a table, look at it, do maybe math in their head. And that is a certain type of engagement. Even if they're not interested, you'll get a little bump, I think,
I think so.
by just being like, here's a thing, you do this. You know, that'll I think it helps. Your mileage may vary, I guess, but I think having, you know, something to do, right, is always a good place to start.
Okay, so before we run out of time, this
is time.
We should talk about when kind of discerning when it's time to kind of like, all right, people are kind of bored, so something needs to blow up, or people, the energy level has gone down, but actually we should kind of let it sit, because that's what's best for the group. Do you guys have any opinions on that? Like, okay, no, it's time for something to happen, time for something to jump out of the bushes, or no, people want to contemplate this, and it's okay, the energy level goes down a little bit.
I mean, I think part of it depends on how long you've already been playing that session. I think it depends on what the energy level actually is. Are we at the energy level of like, man, I really want to go home and go to bed? Or are we just kind of like, okay, we've hit a lull? You know, just that particular question. And then if you do blow something up, do you want what do you want to happen after that? Do you want something to explode and immediately deal with it that session? Or do you want to blow something up and then be like, all right, that's it. See you next week.
Cliffhanger at every single time.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, maybe not every single time,
because
but yes.
Because one of the worst things to do is to blow something up with the intention of continuing and then realize, oh, that didn't increase the energy.
Yeah.
And then kind of have to stop it after you're like, okay, roll initiative. Let's do a couple rounds of combat or, whatever it is you're doing to respond. And you're like, okay, we'll pick this up next week. Bye.
Yeah.
It's really awkward.
I think looking at the that is a good point. If you're like, yeah, let's bring the energy level up, and then you realize we don't have the energy to bring up, that's going to be, that is going to really fizzle out, and that's not going to feel good. Very good point. How do you tell? I'm derailing myself now. How do you tell if that's the case, other than just trying to see if people are exhausted? I mean, I guess it has to do with how long you've been going. Sure.
Yeah, and for me, I like 2 to 3 hour sessions.
Same.
So if I hit 3 hours and something explodes, and then we keep going, I'm like, but we've already done a game.
Yes. I kind of agree.
Yeah, and so
in most cases,
I think 2 hours is sort of the, do we want to go another one? And again, I think it's totally fine to explode something, and if your players respond immediately with, okay, I do this.
Yeah.
Then you can keep going. But if they say, oh, so shocking, end it.
Now that's good.
Stop.
Addressing Rush's question about how do you make that call, one of the things that I would look for is, what does the table interaction look like that doesn't involve you? Are they still taught, like if the energy levels come down and it's like, if this is non-action, there's not like dice rolls that Abby loves, and there's not like all this stuff that's going on, but are they really interested and really talking to each other? What if it's this? Maybe we should try this? And if they really seem like they're engaged and they're getting somewhere, all right, and they're talking about what to do, I will let that go, as long as it feels like they're not going in circles. If it becomes analysis paralysis, then you interrupt with something, right? But if I will let them go for really as long as they need, as long as the conversation seems fruitful. If it kind of peters out and they're like, well, okay, so we sort of decided, yeah, maybe tomorrow we'll do that, and then there's like 3 beats and nobody says anything, that's when you need to pick it up and run with it some more. Well, I mean, what do you think, Rush? What's the answer to your own question?
Well, that's one of the reasons I asked you. I think it's a very, very difficult question. So, for example, I have a group that I was running. I'm running through a 7th Sea game, and they often, because they have gamed for a long time, they want a lull.
Mm-hmm.
There were moments in which I tried to push action and getting a read of the room. I was like, no, that's not what they want. They actually kind of want a lull. They want, what was happening is they were puzzling over difficult decisions,
mm-hmm.
and they wanted to spend a long time puzzling it over that. And it was very quiet, and only a few people were talking. But by reading body language, eye contact, fidget level, are you on your phone or not? I was like, actually, this is what they want. And,
mm-hmm.
And the reason, it's not what I would say most groups would have wanted, but because they had been these guys have been gaming as long as I have, they just they wanted something a little different. They wanted something, and they're also, their own energy levels and attention spans are just geared a little bit differently than
mm-hmm.
say the median D&D player nowadays. So that is one of the reasons I brought this question up, because I learned a lot on that evening. I was like, wow, okay, not everyone wants something blown up every 5 or 10 minutes. And in fact, later on, they mentioned that those episodes that they had where stuff was happening all the time was like a high action movie. They were like, it's happening too fast.
Uh-huh.
I don't. It's exhausting.
Yeah. They actually said they didn't like it. They said that out loud. So I was like, okay.
I'm in a game that has almost every session has a random obstacle like right at the finish line, and I'm like, after a certain point, you're like, can we just win for once?
No, this is okay.
Gotcha.
This
And
is all has
I've
to
got
do with
whole thoughts
pacing.
on that too, but
Gotcha.
that's a different episode.
Okay.
Pacing is kind of what you're talking about there, right?
A little
And
bit,
that's
yeah.
something you had flagged as yeah. There are thoughts on that.
And a lot to talk about with that
Yeah,
one.
that's why I said I had thoughts on, wait a little before blowing something up, is because I'm in a
Right.
game where something blows up about every session. I'm like,
Right. No, I think it, without getting into the pacing discussion, I think you do have to have those beats where if it's just go, 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 then I don't know, you don't really get to enjoy the situations or the outcomes or that sort of thing. You need those beats where it's a little bit down to just kind of be with the concept and be like, okay, that was a grand adventure or a harrowing encounter or whatever. And I think there's a time and place for like keeping it pressing and making it feel like they just don't have a moment to, but that's intentional, right? You don't want that to just be the default state of things. Or at least I don't. So I think that it is worth evaluating. Is it just that people are not into this? Or is it that, okay, we've reached that lull? And I think looking at what immediately has been preceding this is probably a good place to start.
Yeah, I've seen a lot on TTRPG, Twitter, social media in general. A lot more people talking about like hobbies that their characters have and what their characters do in downtime. And
That's
so
cool.
I do think it's really important to have those sessions that, like, okay, you did this whole story arc where you fought the big bad of this arc. You finally got vengeance for against the person that murdered your whole family, tragic backstory type stuff. Okay, so you take a nap the next day. You just go out and like get a kebab from, some medieval fantasy street vendor. Like,
Yeah.
Right. And again, that goes into pacing and downtime, which is something else we could talk about in the future. So anyway, we're around the 45-minute mark, so I think that's a good place to stop.
I'd agree.
And we have talked about reading the room, and we will delve more into it later.
All right.
All right, guys.
Sounds good.
Thank you guys for watching, everyone.